A/B testing. So A/B testing, also known as bucket testing, split testing, or essentially controlled experiment, is a standard way to evaluate user engagement or satisfaction from a new service, feature, or product. Now, this is actually a kind of strange and convoluted definition, or maybe just one that has some shortcomings. And I'll point out right here, for example, standard way to evaluate user engagement or satisfaction from a new service, feature, or product. So usually A/B testing are controlled experiments in the context of information management and information systems. So it will involve the testing of the role of the service or feature or product. So this is akin to the drug or the treatment that we are using in the more lab scientific medical context. But it's not only to evaluate user engagement or satisfaction. This is kind of like business lingo. It's also to evaluate revenue, to evaluate profit, to profit maximization, right? So increase the surplus. So it's regardless of user satisfaction, because maybe users may be less satisfied but still give you more revenue. So business usually, well, I don't know if usually, but may not care so much about user satisfaction or engagement, or maybe that is what they care about, or maybe it is actually revenue regardless of user engagement. Sometimes there's greater revenue with less user engagement. It's totally possible, right? So these are the outcome measures of interest that can be used to investigate. A/B testing, this is another definition here, more of mine. A/B testing is a form of controlled experiment, generally online with a large user audience, thousands, millions of users, and so on, to test the impact of one function, design, or feature of the application or system on other relevant metrics. So just kind of opening up those relevant metrics to include user engagement, satisfaction, revenue, and so on. Similarly to local or offline controlled experiments, online controlled experiments involve separating two groups to test the effect of one or more variables on one or more other variables, just to kind of drive that point home. Generally, there is a single or a small set of feature changes, just like one added link or one change of color somewhere or an additional phrase as the treatment. And we want to keep these small because otherwise it's kind of hard to know what's affecting what. So for every single experiment, we want to keep the change relatively small. And also for each experiment, there are several other metrics or variables to be observed. The age of the audience, maybe the location, geography, length of stay on the application, the number of pages visited, the amount spent, and so on. Then we can then see which ones are more relevant for what and how they change across the two groups being tested. And of course, A/B testing refers to A is one group and B the other. One is the treatment and one is the control. So here we have an example from one of the readings I'm suggesting for you from Kohavi and Longbottom, 2017. So here's an actual test that was done with a search engine and the ads with site link. So here's the control type of a feature, let's call it, or you can call this a design or a feature. And then notice that this one here, this ad showing, this ad visualization, does not have this added links here. So the idea was to have two groups. One is the treatment. This has the drugs, so to speak, the one feature to be analyzed, and this one doesn't. And then you send this, you have this to, for a lot of people to use, maybe everybody in California or everybody in New York. And then here the control, everybody in other states. This might not be a good randomization and separation, because then you can have also add bias. Maybe people in New York are different than people in Kentucky and so on. So probably want to mix them up and randomize them, and we'll talk about that as well. And as reported in this paper, results in this particular test showed that the newly added site links did increase revenue, but also degraded user metrics and page load time. likely because of increased vertical space usage. So once again, it's not just about increasing user engagement, it may be about increased revenue or some other measures. And in this case, this was actually better. When people saw this, they engaged with this, they actually spent more money. But it also degraded user metrics, maybe so things like reported user satisfaction, or maybe how many pages or how many clicks the users gave. So this can be a lot of different things. And also increased degraded page load time probably means increased page load time, so it takes longer to load. If you're multiplying the milliseconds for millions and millions of page views and so on, that may happen. So here's an overall overview of the online controlled experiment. So you have a pool of users, 100% of your users, they go to your site, and what you need to do is divide into two groups, because if we have two groups only, then usually we put 50% on the control group and then 50% on the treatment group. We need to determine the user interactions that are being measured. So these are metrics or variables, and then prepare them for analysis and compare. So this kind of needs to be determined before you do any kind of testing. And here at this stage, maybe there will be things that need to be added or averaged or subtracted or integrated before you actually apply some other of the statistical tests of comparison, like statistical significance test and so on. There are a number of elements to consider for online controlled experiments, and these are essentially the same for other kinds of scientific controlled experiments. So this really all goes back to how to conduct experiments, although there are different interests and different motivations from the scientific side to more of the business side, and from more of the application and online A/B testing context. Either way, you usually have all these elements here. Sample size needs to be considered. How many people are you testing with? 100, 1,000, a million? The different kinds of tests you use may be dependent on the sample size that you have. Usually the more the better, but not necessarily. Sometimes actually small could even be better to really understand more durable and reliable relationships, because once you get into a lot of people, every little thing can seem like it's significant. Unit of observation. So are you looking at people or are you looking at accounts? Because a person may not be the same as an account. Sometimes multiple people use the same account, or one person may have multiple accounts. So how do you differentiate that? Is this a business account or a group account or an individual account, and so on? Metrics to measure. So these can be dozens or hundreds. In fact, maybe even thousands. So are you measuring the clicks? How many pages people like? Are you measuring pages people click, the functions used, the location of the user, the time of connection, demographics of the user? Are you counting how many products they purchase? So maybe you want to see if people with a certain change, a feature change, a certain treatment, you want to see if the more quantity or diversity of items are sold rather than the total items, and so on. So the metrics to measure are just very large amount. There is usually the main outcome of interest. So you might be concerned on revenue increase, or just overall clicks, or overall engagement, or time spent on site. Maybe you want to maximize time spent on site. For example, if you're like Facebook, right? This is kind of the biggest thing for them. So maybe clicks, overall total clicks, or average clicks, or median clicks, so you need to understand your business to know this. There are triggers or filters that need to be considered. So are there particular targeted audiences that you are trying to focus on? Are you comparing and exploring differences between like weekdays versus holiday use? There's randomization that needs to be considered. So how you're randomizing your group of people. Are you just doing a stratified sampling, a block randomization, a simple randomization? So there are many ways to go about that as well. And you want to make sure that, like we were saying before, you don't just test, group A with New Yorkers and group B is made up of Kentuckians only, because that can bias the treatment. Maybe it's the geography itself that has an impact and not actually the treatment or the feature that was changed. There are a number of analytical tests to be considered. So tests of comparing groups like t-tests. There are other formulas and functions to consider. So things like multivariate regression to compare the groups and the impact of variables on your main outcome of interest. Also, there are all sorts of diagnostic tools and procedures that may be employed. So maybe you want to always at the end ensure that your tests were performed as planned, that all the related relevant variables were captured, and people did the people actually see the ads like that? You thought you set it up so that people would see the ads, but then you interview them at the end or interview some people and say, no, I didn't really see anything. It didn't even come up. So these are some of the important elements to consider, and they're also raised here in Kohafi and Longbottom article. Here we have some examples. This is coming from the site here of, you can check out yourself from A/B testing. So here's from booking.com. They had one interface that they wanted to test and to see if it either increased revenue, or increased searches, or increased bookings, and so on. So this is one view, and this is the other view, and then you can see this is the one that they actually implemented. Now we don't really know why they implement, what measures they were looking for, but I can kind of see that this is better, right? But who knows? You have to test. That's the whole point. Now this one is a very slight one. It's kind of interesting. So the only thing they changed here, this is from Netflix, is instead of join Netflix, so they compared 3 groups: join Netflix, try it now, and get Netflix. So they really just changed the sentence. And try it now apparently either increased the most account creation or view time or whatever it is they were measuring. Here's also from Netflix. This is their the plan page, so where you select the plan. So they had 2 views, 2 different designs. So this is, both kind of function and feature and design kind of mix when we're talking about applications. But this one is largely about the design. And they did an A/B testing. And I mean, why not, right? And this one was selected, and probably because people that actually saw this page were, engaged more, or selected the higher, more costly plans, and so on, or just actually signed up for the plan instead of just looking at the page and leaving. Here's an example from Airbnb, and I think this one has to do with how the stars are shown. So it's once again very slight change how the review stars are shown, and actually this little bit more kind of shorthand and also numerical representation was better. Now I don't remember, I don't even think they kind of go into detail what they were measuring for, but this is the thing, this is the treatment itself, and this is the one that actually won out. Once again, maybe because of increased revenue from the people that had shown this kind of page instead of this page, increased bookings or length of booking, and so on. Next, we're going to go into tenets of A/B testing.